Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my epic rant on the 2024 sci-fi epic Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver. Now, The Scargiver is a very fitting title if you ask me, because this is the kind of bad movie that leaves behind scars. Deep wounds that never really fully heal, that get opened up again every time you see another bad film, another film that is such a spectacular failure from a once renowned or once talented filmmaker. It's that bad of a movie. I am honestly floored that Zack Snyder not only had one opportunity to make a competent or a good sci-fi epic, but now he's had two opportunities, and with the second opportunity, he managed to fail even more spectacularly than the first time around. And Rebel Moon Part 1 sucks. But Rebel Moon Part 2, like, this is one of those sequels and one of those second installments that's so shitty that it makes the first film, as bad as it is, look great in comparison. This is honestly one of the worst part 2s I've ever seen in anything. Like, this is barely even a sequel for one. It really is just more of a continuation of the first, which is the whole point. I know it's meant to be part 2 of part 1, but there wasn't enough for one movie, let alone two. So this just comes across even more pointless and even more frustrating. And Zack Snyder is yet again back directing, because he directed this back to back with the first part. And Robert Zemeckis, this guy ain't. This isn't Back to the Future Part 2 and 3 level quality filmmaking here. This is more like number 2. The kind that you leave behind in a toilet bowl. And the kind that won't flush. Zack Snyder, to me, at this point in his career, he is such a shell of what he used to be that he should change his last name to Shyster. He's not Zack Snyder anymore. He's Zack Shyster, because he's a con artist. He's a guy who is banking his future projects on his previous reputation. He's a guy who's getting people to give him money and give him opportunities to make these films based on what he did in the past, not based on what he's capable of doing now. He's a con artist. He's a shyster. And unless he decides to take a long break or retire, I just think it's just going to get worse from here, if that's at all possible. Because since Army of the Dead, it's just been a steep decline into the shitter as far as Zack Snyder's career is concerned. He can talk about the high view count numbers on Netflix all he wants to and try to act like that's a sign of some kind of big win for Rebel Moon. But if you look at the critical reception for this film and for part 1, it's not pretty. It's pretty awful. And it does not paint a good picture at all. It doesn't really show promise. It doesn't show that there's enough for another film in this series, let alone 6, which is apparently what Snyder thinks this franchise is actually capable of, and thinks that he's capable of. Pumping out 6 of these movies and not having the rest of them suck as much as these two did. And his direction in this, it's more of the same from what you got in the first movie. Same shit, different day. But in some capacity and in some aspects, it manages to even top his bad direction in part 1. I don't know what the fuck Zack Snyder was thinking when he decided in his mind that this film needed a montage sequence of grain farming, and then that sequence needed a ton of slow-mo. So what you have is a sequence that is so mind-blowingly bad and stupid and dumb and asinine that you're just left speechless. And then you laugh hysterically because you can't believe what you're seeing. Zack Snyder, he's a joke now. Like, this is the kind of thing that you would see in a parody of slow-mo in a action film, or somebody trying to parody Zack Snyder's style. And the man is actually shooting a sequence where people are farming grain and he's using slow-mo. Grain farming is cool, guys! I'm telling you, look how cool it is! It's not cool. It never will be. What the fuck were you thinking, Zack? And it doesn't stop there, because the battle sequences, there's so much more action in this than the first part. But all the scenes run together. None of them really have that much excitement to be had. And it's not just because of the fact that the script is so bad and you don't give a shit about these characters when it comes to whether or not they die in battle. But that doesn't help. But the action sequences, because of the overabundance of slow-mo, because of just how everything just looks the same, there's just really not a lot of visual excitement to be had. And these sequences fall flat. And there's so many other moments that fall flat directing-wise. Just like the first part. Scenes where people are just sharing moments of dialogue with one another are just really flat and lifeless and dead inside. And sequences that are supposed to be visually stimulating, they don't stimulate you at all. They don't stimulate the senses. They just exist. They're just there. You're like, okay, all right, there's a shot in space. Oh, there's an establishing shot of the grain farm again. Oh, here's another shot in the spaceship. Like, there's just no sense of flair or style or anything. It just looks so bland and dull, and everything just bleeds together, and nothing about the film visually is really that enticing or eye-catching. Like, there's nothing about this film that you're going to look at and actually remember when it comes to the visuals. That's a sign of a bad film. That's a sign of bad directing. And yet again, Zack Snyder cannot get convincing performances out of his cast. Everyone just seems like they're either phoning it in, or they are hamming it up too much, or their own limitations as an actor are just horribly exposed. Because Zack Snyder just can't do anything to prop them up. And he can't do anything to hold them back or to limit the moments that show their limitations. So it's not a film that is full of visual eye candy that makes you go, wow, that's a cool shot. It's not a movie that has anything when it comes to the action sequences that's that creative or inventive or that exciting to watch. It's not a film where the director seems like he really is in charge and he's really getting the best out of the production and the best out of everybody in it. It just seems like he's just there and he's along for the ride, and he's just resting on his laurels and his previous reputation. And I think in a large part it's because this man has built an ego that's the size of the fucking galaxy. So he can't take a step back and see what he's producing and see the shit that he's actually releasing and realize this isn't good enough, that he needs to do better. It doesn't help either that he has a bunch of fans who are just circle jerking him 100% of the time. So that doesn't help his ego any at all either. And yeah, it's so bad. It's like, how? You had 2 shots to do this, and both parts equally suck. Both parts have the same problems and the same flaws when it comes to them visually, the same inconsistencies when it comes to the direction. But now you have laughable, parody level sequences like the slow-mo grain farming scene. The script by Zack Snyder, Kurt Johnstad, and Shay Hatton, it's once again bad because there isn't enough for a 2-hour-long story. Yet again, it's just barely 30 minutes or 45 minutes of content that's stretched out to 2 hours. It's such a bad script that there's a whole sequence in this film where you have characters from the movie sitting around a table and just talking with one another and providing a backstory for these characters that the first part failed to do. That is so pathetic. That is so fucking bad. That's just beyond awful. That is so crap. That's such a crappy excuse of a script to have a moment like that because the script was so lazy and so awful the first time around, it didn't bother to provide these characters with this backstory in the first place. So now you have a whole fucking sequence that only exists just to provide these characters who are now in a second part of a story with a backstory. And so much of this film, and so much of this script in particular, is fucking useless. Like, the whole first hour of this film is mostly unneeded garbage. Slow-mo grain farming, the whole grain farming montage didn't need to be there, didn't need to be anywhere near as long as it is. It felt like the first hour of this story and this script was nothing but fucking grain farming. That's not exciting. That's not fun. That's not what I think of when I think of a movie that's supposedly inspired by Heavy Metal magazine and even has the font and the style of heavy metal. You don't deserve the heavy metal font because you don't even put anywhere near amount of the same level of effort that those writers did when it comes to those stories. You don't deserve that. And you're not as cool, you're not as innovative, you're not as irreverent, you're not as any of those things. Yeah, the first hour is just so bad. It's honestly worse than anything in the first part. I was blown away. I was like, wow. You literally are just going to have the first hour of the movie mostly just be nothing but grain farming scenes and cliche generic sequences of General Titus training these farmers how to fight. Oh, and of course we gotta once again establish that Atticus, the villain, he's Atticus Noble. He's once again the big bad. And it didn't work the first time around, and it sure as hell doesn't work the second time. And so you have this guy, Atticus Noble, who was a lame villain the first time around, not even a C tier bad guy, more like a Z tier bad guy, and now he's brought back to A tier, and he's got this whole plan to go and take his fleet and attack Velt because he wants revenge, and he wants Korra, and he sends his forces down there. There's a big battle between the farmers of Velt and Korra and her team of rebels, and they fight the Imperial forces, and there are some casualties along the way, including Nemesis, which I was like, great. One of the only characters, one of the only members of this team that I kind of didn't mind, and you're going to kill her off. Wonderful. Fantastic. Gotta keep Korra alive, despite the fact that this character is unbelievably weak and nothing but another Mary Sue. But no, we got to keep this character alive. We got to keep the one remaining survivor of the Blood Axes. We got to keep her alive. Character that's so memorable that I don't even remember her name. All I know is that she has this look of a wannabe Furiosa, complete with the spray paint over her eyes and the same haircut, but has none of the screen presence or charisma that Charlize Theron has, or Anya Taylor-Joy. And oh yeah, I gotta keep the useless Prince guy, Prince Tarek. He's gotta stay alive. The kill off the farmer guy, who winds up being the love interest now of Korra, because it's, you know, they were insinuating that they were kind of potentially going to be a couple in the first part. Well, now they actually do go through with that, but all that he gets in return from that is a trip to the grave. It's like, oh man, I got to bang Korra, and all that led to for me is death. Was it worth it? Was the pussy worth it? Was it worth that much? Was it worth dying for? It doesn't seem like it to me. Yeah, you get the battle scene where a bunch of farmers get killed and slaughtered, other Imperial forces gets taken out, and just the way that it's structured, the way that the whole battle sequence is written, it's so predictable. There's not anything that happens in it where you're like, wow, I didn't see that coming, or wow, that was surprising. Like, everything about it is just predictable, been there, done that shit when it comes to a battle sequence. Oh, it looks like the odds are against them, or they start out strong and take out some of the ships, and it looks like they might be able to do it, but then, oh no, the forces are too strong and they can't do it, and they're in trouble, and then something comes in and saves them, and this thing happens to be the robot who now just decided out of the blue that he's actually going to do something. And he dispatches these soldiers and the forces of the Imperial fleet so easily in one sequence, where you're like, couldn't this robot could have just taken on the entire army and won the battle by himself? Why did he just decide, now I'm going to show up, and now because it looked like the battle was lost, and then here comes their savior in Robot Jones. Oh, I'm sorry, Robot Jimmy. And so yeah, you get all of this action, all of these scenes with explosions and gunplay and all of this other stuff, and you undo it all by having a robot show up who could just take out everybody. Because of the way that it's set up and the way that it's showcased, the robot is so overpowered. And it's not like it really would have mattered that much anyway, to be honest, because the script does a bad job making you care about this battle. because yet again, it's a lot of weak characters and not a lot of depth, and it leads to you not giving really that much of a shit about who wins or even who loses. And then you get to the stuff with Korra, where she sneaks on board Atticus's ship and does it in like the most easy way possible, that you're like, how dumb are the people on this ship? How dumb are the Imperial forces? Are the Imperial forces actually a bunch of spaceballs in disguise? How many assholes do we have on board this ship? Yo, is that what we're dealing with here? I mentioned this in my review of the first part, how the screenwriters did a bad job making the Imperial force feel like a threat, and man, is that very evident here in part 2. They get outsmarted way too easily. All it takes to take down the ship is just to set up some bombs in one part of the ship, and you have a ship that has tons of different soldiers on it, and it seems like half of these soldiers get taken out by one woman in Korra. Weak. Bunch of fucking pussies. And they get taken out just without, honestly, that much resistance at all. The ship is blowing up and it's crashing, and you get a laser sword fight between Korra and Atticus, and it's just as exciting and thrilling as it sounds, complete with a shit ton of green screen. And this whole battle, there's no reason to really feel like Atticus is a threat, because you already saw this guy get his ass kicked. You already saw him lose. And because of how Korra is built up, you know that she's not going to lose. You know that she's going to win. So it's fucking pointless. It's just another extension of just how bad this script is, and how bad the script is for both of these fucking movies. Like, you really could have had an opportunity to establish a new threat, a new villain at the end of the first part, and then have him be the one that Korra fights, or it becomes a standstill and it's a draw, and Korra just barely escapes with her life, and you set up this other villain for future installments in the series. But no, instead, now you don't have anybody, because you started off with a weak-ass bitch of a bad guy, and then you really didn't set up anything that could potentially take his place, because it's not like Belisarius is any better. And speaking of Belisarius, that whole flashback sequence, that's another instance of how badly written this film is. That whole sequence is so laughable. You're telling me that you have a band, you have an orchestra who not only is playing this string music for this random meetup on this ship, but as soon as people start getting killed, specifically the king and the queen and the princess get shot, they're still playing? They're still playing the fucking violin? They're still doing the strings? When people are getting fucking murdered? They're not like, oh man, maybe it's time to stop the music. Nah, we're gonna keep playing, and the music matches the tone. Give me a fucking break. That is so bad. And like I said in my review of the first part, if it's predictable and cliched, and you see a lot of the things coming and nothing really surprises you, that isn't always necessarily inherently a bad thing. If you have strong characters and other elements of the script to make up for it. But this doesn't have that. It doesn't have that to fall back on. So all it's doing is doing a trust fall, and there's no one there, and it's just falling flat on its fucking ass onto hard concrete. And there's moments at the end where it's trying to be emotional, like with Gunner and his sacrifice, and it doesn't do anything for me because I never cared for that character. Didn't feel anything when he died. Nemesis, it sucked because I kind of liked that character, but at the same time, she was so poorly written. There was barely any depth to her. Like, you get a bit of her backstory during that whole round table scene, but it was too little too late, and then she dies. And there's just a lot of other laughable, just poorly written moments too in this script. I mean, there's a whole scene where General Titus, out of nowhere, just starts singing some kind of chant. And you're just like, what is the point of this? Why is this scene here? Why is this happening? And speaking of why is this happening, the ending of the film that sets up things for another series of movies, where all of a sudden a twist is revealed that the princess isn't dead. And I'm like, why have that whole sequence where the princess gets shot, and why have all this stuff where Korra feels guilty and is running away and is conflicted and is just dealing with all this angst because of her involvement in the princess's death, and the princess has been alive this entire time? This is from a line of dialogue. It was like, oh, by the way, from one of the characters, by the way, the princess actually isn't dead. She was just in another castle. But yeah, the princess is still alive. And I'm like, what a way to make this even more of a Star Wars knockoff. Oh, the princess. We got to go save the princess. Oh, like A New Hope? And the film ends with this cast of characters where you're like, oh, this is going to be our group for the next adventure. And I'm like, I don't give a shit. I don't care. I would rather have Zack Snyder moon me with his ass than watch part 3 of Rebel Moon and be exposed to any more of this shitty writing, this shitty filmmaking. And no, an R-rated director's cut is not going to make this shit any better. The cast, once again, just really not anything that is remotely that special, that accomplished, that great. Sofia Boutella is once again really, really piss poor. Doesn't have any screen presence. Bad performance. You don't buy her when it comes to the multiple sequences where she's taken out half an army by herself. Makes you roll your eyes. Doesn't really have any genuine chemistry with any of the cast members, including the guy that she's falling for in Michiel Huisman's character Gunner. Djimon Hounsou, nice to see him. Still doesn't have a whole lot to do in this. And it really shows because he's straining hard. And then you have the scene where he's chanting out of nowhere. And then it becomes embarrassing. And then you're like, oh man, you just feel for Hounsou here. But not in the way where you're sympathetic towards his character. You feel for the actor having to be stuck in such a garbage fire of a film. Ed Skrein, this guy still sucks. Still just acting like a pompous asshole. Still being fuckboy Jeremy Irons, but this time he has a laser sword. And Michiel Huisman, there isn't much to say about this guy. Just not really that much of a performance, not much of a character. There's a good chunk of the film, like in the climax, where he's just sitting there on a ship with his thumbs up his ass, not doing a damn thing. Doona Bae, she's trying, but man, is she given dick to work with. Anthony Hopkins, once again, barely in the film, and his character finally gets to be involved in an action sequence, but all it does is just expose even more issues with the story and with the film, and just makes you wish that this character was involved more. Like the action sequence with the robot, it would have been cooler if it wasn't one of those things where, oh, well, now the robot does something and it was something that completely sort of undermined everything else. Like, if it wasn't something like that, and it didn't make everyone in the army look so weak, then I think it might have worked a little bit better. But at the same time, all it does is just remind me of how much of a better film this would be if we were focusing on this robot character instead of Mary Sue 9000 in Korra. And Fra Fee, still very unimpressive as Belisarius, and he still has the same bad wig and beard combo. Like, you would think, like, after the first part was filmed and you saw it on film, you'd be like, yeah, that looks like shit. Maybe let's fix that out for part 2. No, same bad combo as before. That shows you how good of a product this is. That shows you how much people cared about this movie. That they would see something like that coupled with really bad green screen and be like, yeah, that's acceptable, that's fine. Cut, print, send it to Netflix. And you have people involved with this film like Zack Snyder, who was talking about how this should have gotten a theatrical release. No. You should be thanking the gods of cinema that this wasn't a theatrical release. Because if any part of this was a theatrical release, it would have been a massive flop. And it probably would have killed your career. But because it's Netflix, you can look at, oh, well, it had this many views. And you could twist that into being a success. Despite so much failure. And speaking of failure, Zack Snyder once again fails as a cinematographer. I don't know what he's thinking. You can't do that very well. You can't direct well right now. Why do you think you can be a good cinematographer, a good DP? The editing by Dodie Dorn, just kind of there. The music by Tom Holkenberg. Whenever it's not trying to rip off Wonder Woman with Korra's theme, like it's kind of, or not Korra's theme, Nemesis's theme. It's nothing special. It's just as forgettable as pretty much everything else in the film or both of these movies. And this is shorter than the first part, but it still suffers from the same pacing problems because you don't give a shit about these characters. You don't care about this story. And I still cannot believe that there was a slow-mo grain farming sequence. I'm totally beside myself. I can't believe that I fucking saw that. And I really don't know what else to say about this film, Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, except I don't want to give it any thanks. I don't want to give it props. There really isn't anything to give it props for. I just want to give it 2 middle fingers because it was a waste of my fucking time. And as bad as something like Madam Web was, I think it tried harder. It failed, but I think it tried a little harder than both of these films did. And it was like inoffensively bad for the most part. Like, that movie didn't have a script that was so dumb and so stupid and poorly conceived that it was like the hold my beer version of screenplays. It was like, oh, you thought the script for part 1 was bad? Hold my beer. I'm going to top that. I'm going to be dumber. I'm going to be worse, and I'm going to be even more lame and forgettable and shitty than part 1. To me, both of these films should be a career killer for Zack Snyder. But he'll keep on going. We'll probably get part 3 and 4 of Rebel Moon, and both parts will be just as torturous and just as terrible as these other two. And man, I'm so looking forward to that. I'm so anticipating that. But anyway, that's all I got. And thanks for watching my video. Thanks for watching my rant. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.